What's up, friendly neighborhood nerds? If you want to hear interviews from industry pros, get first looks, and have access to endless comic content, wake up. Please wake up. You're in a coma. Your mother misses you.
What's up, friendly neighborhood nerds? This is Judah Rad, and I'm here with Robo Strange and Respawn. And today we have a very, very special guest. He's worked with Marvel, Marvel UK, DC Comics, 2000 AD, as well as prose novels and comics set in the Warhammer universe. He also writes non-picture books for Angry Robot. He's currently writing Rai for Valiant Entertainment, and today he is on our show. Welcome, Dan. Thanks for being here.
Absolute pleasure to be here. Thank you very much for having me.
It's a pleasure. Before we get into it, I just want to give a shout out to Valiant Entertainment Marketing and Publicity Manager Greg Katzman for setting this up. We are eternally grateful, and we love you.
We do. We do. Greg essentially plans my entire life these days. Every morning I get up and say, have I got an email from Greg where I have to do something? Yes, I do. Okay, that's that, and the rest of my life is arranged around it. So it's almost like we're married.
Yeah.
Awesome.
I can't wait till we get a Greg.
Everyone needs a Greg.
Yeah.
So we're gonna jump right into Rai. You're 6 issues deep on Rai with number 7 coming out on the 23rd,
Yes,
and
that's
yeah, I love it. I love what you're doing with the series so far. There's an interesting juxtaposition between these two main characters. We have Rai, who's half machine, half human, wants to be human, but seems like kind of clueless on what that actually means. And then you have Rai Jin, who's all machine, and yet humanity comes very naturally to him. What will it take for Rai to embrace the compassion and hope that he tries so hard to suppress?
Well, that's a very good question. Yeah, I think the juxtaposition is obviously it's deliberate, and it's to throw up the obvious contrast, but they are so similar. They're literally brothers. Rai Jin is a prototype of Rai, but everything about that is reversed. Everything, as you say, the one who has a human component is acts less human than the one without a human component. The older brother is smaller and looks younger than all of that. So they are this kind of interesting double act. Where I sort of feel that Rai Jin is almost acting as his conscience. I think the difference, the thing that will possibly change things, is that Rai is, from his machine half, he's very much on a quest. He's got a mission, and to him that mission, which is the destruction of the father, the AI that created them all, and is the greatest threat ever, is the one thing that will make a difference in the world. He's essentially stopped father in the past. He's never done it in a way that will take. He wants to do it completely so that there's no chance of father ever returning, which means that, and I think probably because he's sort of done it, but not quite done it several times before, that he's so determined to finish the job, so he can essentially, metaphorically, put his sword down and rest, that now nothing is getting in the way of that. So he's got that very kind of programmed attitude that this is it, nothing else, everything else is secondary. Which is admirable, and he even explains that several times, and he talks about, he openly talks about it. He understands this mental driver that he's got, but the trouble is it does make him look cold, essentially. That the other things, minor, everyday, and sometimes quite important everyday things happen, and he kind of goes, well, I'm not bothering with that, because I'm going over there. And Rai Jin's sort of metaphorically tugging on his sleeve, going, wait, we could just stop and do this thing, which is an interesting thing. I think. Again, I'm not giving spoilers, I'm literally theorising on the basis of their characters. If he was to stop father, I don't know how he would change. I think he assumes that he will when his mission is finished. He assumes he will, but it's almost like, will he know how? If he's been that good at repressing the things that he's supposed to be doing, will he know how? So it is a fun, and it's a very interesting tension. And it also does allow me to play him as this kind of real very driven, singular man with no name warrior who is just about the mission, and it allows me to play Rai Jin as this often quite comical, iconoclastic voice in the background, saying these things.
Like boy companion. I love.
Yeah.
It was what was really fun was seeing. Is it Gilad or Gilad, the Eternal Warrior?
I call him Gilad, but yeah.
Gilad.
Yes.
It was fun seeing Gilad, and he was temporarily kind of part of the story. His relationship with the Geomancer was sort of an interesting parallel to Rai and Rai Jin's relationship. It's similar, but very, very different. Has he served his purpose in the story, or can we expect more Gilad going forward?
I think there is a distinct. I mean, literally, they're in the same world. It's one of the things that I was doing, which is to take to establish this wild and crazy world we're building does have strong connective tissue with the present day Valiant universe. It's quite clearly the Valiant world is just the future Valiant world. I was trying to think of all the different bits and pieces that would or could have survived, and therefore he could have encountered, and readers will go, "Oh, it is Valiant. Look, there's that guy." And obviously, the Eternal Warrior, the clues in the name, was one of those things. He was one of the people who he could encounter. So he's in the world. There is every chance that they would cross paths again. And I was wary of it because obviously the Rai series came out of Fallen World, which I also read, the event book, which set this whole thing up. And that had kind of everybody available in it, or a lot of people in it, including the Eternal Warrior and the Geomancer. And I liked them very much at the time. And I thought, they're very cool. I'd love to do things with them. They're very, very great. And so I was turning that over in my mind. And I was writing Rai as well and sort of vaguely plotting world domination via the Eternal Warrior as well. I suddenly thought, no, that'd be great to guest star them. And I thought, oh, God, actually, it's almost the same book. If I said it in the future, it would almost be the same book. It's this determined lone warrior protecting a youthful ward who is their companion and the symbiotic relationship, traveling the world. And you go, well, no one wants two of that. That's the same thing. But then it occurred to me that not only would they be great characters to meet, but the very similarity, it's a bit like Rai and Raijin, actually, that very similarity is a really interesting thing to look at, because you meet them face to face, and you've got the Eternal Warrior going, you treat Raijin really crappily. You know, he's sort of pointing out the differences between the very fundamental differences in the way they behave and that kind of stuff. And I think that was I would say this, obviously I wrote it, but I thought that was one of the good beats in issue 5 is when kind of Eternal Warrior says to him, you know, you just treat him like an instrument and this kind of stuff. And Rai goes, yes, I do. That's right. And he's like completely cool with that. And I think that was really, that shows his sort of, that kind of maybe enforced, but level of ruthlessness, but still a level of ruthlessness. So yes, I'd like to meet them again. I have, as ever, all sorts of plans and schemes and things like that. And we're I think there was a headlong creative tidal wave going on in the first few issues because everything was going on. And then obviously the pandemic is occurring, and we're having to rethink everything simply because we're having to reconsider our delivery mechanism to an audience, because we're not getting to the audience in the same sort of, and I don't just mean me, I mean comics. Also.
Sure.
I'm not getting to the audience in the same sort of way. Everybody's cutting back, and so what was this wild free for all is now being very carefully considered. So I'm basically got this, you know, heap of ideas, and I'm going, which ones should we do in which order, and how should we do that, and how should we stage this, and that kind of stuff. But yes, there are some quite promising things to come along as we go, and he's not, as far as I'm concerned, he's never going to be far away. And I think it's great because putting him in that story, there was an opportunity for the two of them to clash, which is, you know, it's up there with, you know, who's stronger, the Thing or the Hulk. But it was one of those moments. It's like, well, Rai versus Eternal Warrior, that's pretty cool. But also for them to stand side by side and you're going, that's pretty cool. That's a cool thing to do.
Yeah.
I like how you addressed it, you showed it, but it's sometimes in other books it's like almost exhausting when there's too much space designed to the heroes fighting each other. It was kind of like a nice taste of it, but then we got to move on to the story.
I think in the history of comics, there have been far too many man hours spent fighting people because of a misunderstanding. I understand that misunderstandings can occur.
Right.
It's like, really? For 30 pages?
That's right. That's right.
That's a big misunderstanding.
And for every single meeting ever between two heroes. You're right.
Yes. We did this last time? Oh,
Yeah.
no, I just did that as well.
Yeah.
So you mentioned Fallen World before, which is a great segue for me. It did a really good job of setting the stage for this run, and I'm wondering, are you building up towards another event mini?
Well, I couldn't possibly confirm or deny that, really. But I think it's nice. I think, in my mind, having grown up in the era that I did and read comics, not just read the comics that I read, but read comics in the way that I read them. To me, the epitome of a really great comic is one that simply comes out every month, ideally with the same beloved creative team working on it, and just goes on for a long time. There was a longevity. It's a strange phenomenon that seems to have occurred, and I'm not quite sure when it happened, but a strange phenomenon in what is essentially ongoing periodical publication, which is the comics world, let's face it. At some point, everybody started to think about things being finite, and therefore had to be going to a big dramatic destination. And I think of the comics that I loved when I was a kid, it was like, sort of Jim Starlin couldn't have been on Captain Marvel long enough. The longer he could have done that, or what, you know what I mean? It's like you want Stan and Jack doing Fantastic Four for as long as they possibly humanly can.
Right, yeah.
Roy and John Buscema on the Avengers for as long as possible, because that was a great. And it's not, you wanted the stories to be good, and you wanted big dramatic things to happen. But the most important thing is what you wanted every month to be able to go and get the next bit, because it was part of your life. And the same is true in the UK. Growing up here, we're reading comics like 2000 AD, which were weekly. And you just wanted the next great part of Judge Dredd or Strong Team Dog, because that was what you wanted. You didn't want, you wanted a big dramatic thing to happen, but you didn't want something where you go, oh, they've just broken everything. I don't know what's going to happen next, And therefore, there is attached to that, I think, in comics, a sort of, I know we've got to hype, preferably with bombastic hyperbole of Stan Lee. We've got to hype up everything we're doing. You've got to read this. It's going to be the best and most important thing. You can't miss this true believer type thing. But there comes a point where you're going, your language is empty. This issue was great, and you're telling me the next issue is going to be even greater. And I don't know how it can be. And quite often that's a disappointment, because this is the issue that can't be missed. And you go, it could have been. It was good, but it could. You know what I mean? So to me, that longevity is like a weird analogy, but it's like a great soap opera, where what you want is more. You don't, So I think, but obviously in this day and age, apparently the readership is put off by long runs of comics, where people recommend a comic and they've got to join it at issue 66 or 173 or 1000 and whatever, and they go, oh, I don't know, I've missed something.
That's
and
right.
I just weird. That never occurred to me as a kid. I just buy the next issue of Daredevil and start reading Daredevil. You know what I mean? And then I'd learn something. But apparently that is an obstacle to readership. So there are always these, these modern things about. God, I'm sounding old and stuffy, aren't I? But there's these little modern things about jumping on points and all that kind of stuff. And I appreciate that one of the best ways of doing that, rather than just doing a few issues until something dies or just deliberately rebooting it to be different and that kind of stuff. One of the greatest ways you can do it is build it organically. So thank you for the kind words about Fallen World. To me, Fallen World is sort of the first 5 issues of Rai, with just a different title.
Yes.
You know what I mean? It wasn't just as a thing, and from that we spun out a book. It was almost like, well, the story starts here, and then we focus it on Rai, and therefore there are obviously both opportunities, and I think in a marketing sense needs for occasionally to expand it out again and do other things. So that was a very long-winded way of avoiding answering that question, yet hinting that it was a possibility. That's what I did.
You must be a writer.
That's right. Now I'm fully in the mood for some kind of like Bold and Beautiful Rai crossover, where it's like stands with the hourglass. These are the days of our Rai.
Oh, there you go.
Okay.
Master
this is
of
a thing
puns.
yeah, that's right. This will become more of a thing throughout the interview. Let us know if we pronounce any names wrong, and by we I mean me. Because when I'm reading a book, and I had this with Harry Potter all through primary school, I was reading it as Hermy 1. And I had no idea, until I saw the movie, I had no idea. That's right.
Right.
Kirby one.
Do you know what? To this day, there are many characters whose names. I to digress, writing Warhammer, I'm inventing stupid sci-fi names all the time.
Good,
And people will often come to me at conventions, they say, and they'll be talking about a character, and I'll suddenly realise they're talking about one of mine, and they're pronouncing a character in a completely different way. And I never go, haha, you stupid person, you're pronouncing it wrong, because as far as I'm concerned, the way you pronounce it is the correct way. That is to say, how everybody pronounces it is the correct way, because that's the way they're reading it. There's no wrong and right. Obviously, Cat Pain America is wrong, but that's not,
I love that. I wish you were just in my everyday life giving me that advice. It's okay. You can make mistakes.
It all belongs to you, so go ahead and call them what you want. And if I'm really confused, I'll write words down on a post-it note and say,
Perfect. Well, that being said, issue number 2, both fun, also tragic. How did you come up with the character? Is it Loki? How would you pronounce it?
I pronounce it Loki, as in genius Loki, which is the Latin phrase which means the spirit of the place, which is kind of me being a smart-ass writer. But whatever you want. How did I come up with that? That was inspired by the kind of pep talk I was getting by Lisa, my editor, who was encouraging me to do the first few issues almost as like standalone issues. So we had that kind of Star Trek feeling of, this is the encounter of the week. There is an ongoing nectar, but we just so we could build the world up a little bit more. And And in many respects, that issue, which I love, I was really pleased with the way it turned out, and obviously the art on it is amazing. But it was quite a risky thing to do as a second issue. It's the sort of thing you do later on in the run because it was very quiet. I mean, there is some action in it, but it's a very quiet, thoughtful, melancholy episode.
It's creepy.
It's creepy, and I think that actually ultimately quite a good thing to do that early on, because you have the explosive action in the first issue, and you have this just like kind of strange. To me, that really did feel like an episode of classic Star Trek where they've been down and there's an empty planet with just a house there, and it's like they can't get out. And that's to me. But I didn't want it to just be menacing. It's like they get in there and it's like, oh, we can't get out because there's something nasty here. They can't get out because this thing is longing for company because it's been there for so long, which of course ties into the kind of artificial longevity and life state of Rai himself and that kind of stuff. So yeah. I mean, I'm glad you like that because it was kind of mournful, and it's certainly an example. I have raved in the past about Juanjo's art on this series because it is mind-blowingly good. But it's a really great example of why his work is good, because you look at one of his explosive images and you go, I can see why he's a great artist. But when you've got essentially a quiet episode, which dare I say could be done in a way where it is kind of static and boring, that's the real danger. You write a script and going, well, if that works, that's great, but otherwise people are going to go, oh god, it's just talky, it's just people talking to each other.
That's right.
He brought his A game to that in a way that even people sitting on sofas and drinking orange juice and stuff like that was so creepy and so detailed and so believable that the issue worked brilliantly as a result. And that is no discredit to other artists, but I just think sometimes you get an artist whose thing is action and big spectacle or amazing design, and then you think, oh, wouldn't it be good to do a really kind of quiet, normal domestic scene, and then it falls flat, and you go, wish I hadn't tried that, because now it just looks like the comics a bit crap. But actually, in his hands, that issue really shone. So I gave him dinosaurs the next issue to make up.
I'm really glad you. Oh, sorry. Go ahead.
Oh, sorry. I was going to ask. It was reminiscent of Fallout at times for me too, but I don't know if you play video games or if that's an interest of yours at all. That Mr. House character.
That's interesting. It is an interest of me because occasionally wearing my different hat, I write video games.
Like Alien Isolation, you mean?
Alien Isolation and all the orcs in the Shadow of Mordor games and stuff like that.
Nice.
But I have to say, so I'm aware of Fallout. I don't play them for the simple reason that I know what I'm like. And I would become very addicted, and therefore I would never get any work done, and people will be cross with me. But yes, I think there's presence. And the thing is, that to me, more and more than ever, and it's always been the case, but certainly in this sort of renaissance of genre culture that we seem to be living in at the moment, and thank goodness for that, comics and TV and games and everything else like that, they all, in the best possible way, sort of feed off each other. You can see echoes of things all over the place going on, where somebody goes with an idea and then somebody else goes, that's a great idea, I'm obviously going to rip it off, but I can do something different with that. And Rai itself is doing that, because Rai itself is well, let's face it, lone wolf and cub. It's any sort of parental unit with younger person alongside. I'm not trying to hide that influence. I want people to look at it and go, is this a bit like Lone Wolf and Cub, or Baby Cart on the River Styx or something like that, and then realise that actually it's doing that, but it's doing that in a different way. So it's taking a trope and playing around with it. So yes, there are there. I'm interested. It's not something I did deliberately in reference to that issue. That issue was, to me, more about, like I said, the spirit of those weird standalone early Star Treks. And also, there is one of my favourite authors of all time is Ray Bradbury. Absolutely adore Ray Bradbury.
Amazing.
Yes.
There is a short story which I think is collected in the Martian Chronicles, which is called There Will Come Soft Rains, I think it is, which is about an automated house that is simply going on forever and ever and ever. It's not sentient, but it was just a little sort of, almost like one of his sort of tone poems that he writes. I went, that would be great. You could sentientize, not a real word, that concept, and then make it much more sort of chilling and sort of. It's almost like a ghost. To me, it's almost like a ghost. It's a technological ghost.
That's
For
right.
sure, Bradbury, that tone, is exactly how I describe it. That Bradbury tone, where it's like morbid.
Yes.
Yeah, it's nice. Yeah.
So you brought up Juan Jose earlier, and I was glad you did, because we wanted to talk about how it's very clear that he's working overtime on this book, along with outstanding colors from Andrew Dolhouse and Dave Sharp. What's the working dynamic been like with this team you have? It seems like you got.
Well, I am blessed with an amazing team, and I take no responsibility for that whatsoever, because obviously that was what Lisa's doing. She just
Lisa, yeah.
Lisa is the answer to everything. She set me on the track. She asked me to do it, and in fact, I don't know if I've said this to you guys before, but I didn't know what the art would be like when I started writing it. So I was maybe 2 issues in when obviously Juan started to sort of catch up with me, and I started to see the pages coming in. So there was I took this big leap of faith, because I knew we'd get a great artist, and I knew that the artist would deliver a nice artwork. But there was that kind of, and it particularly applies to issue 2. There's that particular tone of being able to make compelling the quieter moments. Otherwise, the quieter moments would stop, and I needed to see that, because I was going, I better not. If it's not working, I better not keep putting things like that in the story. And when the pages came through, I don't think I've ever been. The first few pages came through and they arrived, and I got them up on my screen. I don't think I've ever been quite so blown away by the artwork, and then later on by the colour as well, which is phenomenal. And you say he's working overtime. I think he is working overtime. Nevertheless, I think he's being him, because I think that's what he does. That's, if he's going to draw it, that's how you're going to get it.
That's right.
Do you know what I mean? It's not like he's like going, well, this is a special project I'm going to put me. He just does. He brings that every single time in the most extraordinary way. And it gives me, once I saw what he was doing, it gave me greater confidence. So there are certain sequences that you'll have seen already and will see over the next few issues, which I would not have put in if I didn't have the confidence to know that he was handling things so well. So I suppose in issue 4, the early scenes in the farming community, where they're just talking about the farm, they're investigating agricultural machinery. Wow, I am selling this comic. Do you know what I mean? But it's like that could have been really dull, but he makes it look really interesting and really believable. So that when it then comes under attack, you think, here is a real place that needs to be defended, rather than just something that's been vaguely talked about. And some of what might be described as cyberspace moments. I mean, cyberspace is fascinating. Again, William Gibson, one of my favourite writers, but it's also a terrible trope. So you start saying, we're going to do cyberspace and hacking, and you're going, oh, okay. And I went, okay, but I think we can do justice to Spylock and that storyline because of the way he will render it, and that is true of some things coming along in the near future. And then also, because you've seen issue 6, that opening sequence, which is one of my favourite bits of the whole book, where you've got the rain-swept wood and the Roman legionnaires marching along the road to Hadrian's Wall or whatever, and the beasts. Yeah, the beasts. Yeah, the beasts. But even before you get to the beasts are great. But before you even get to the beasts, it's like it's Renaissance walking along and I want a path in the woods in the rain, and I thought, well, to me, if that looks real, that'll be great. That'd be like the opening of a brilliant Netflix show where you're going, are we in the past? Is this real? What's going on? They look real. But if it's just drawn like, oh, they're just Roman soldiers walking and there's a rain effect, it's like, that's going to be the worst thing you've ever seen. I knew he would bring it to that as well, and therefore that was worth doing. Otherwise, I wouldn't have used that space. There are some sequences like that coming up, which there's, and again, it sounds like I'm kind of underselling my own comic, but there's a bit that's coming in very soon where there is an amazingly exciting sequence where several characters are locked in a room for overnight. But it's brilliant. It's absolutely brilliant. There's something happening outside that you never see, so they're locked in a room. And then there's another bit coming up where where several characters go for a long walk that takes about a day. Oh my god, it's brilliant. That's it, and it's almost like this stop frame thing where we see them. It's like 6 hours later and every time. It's just, again, it wouldn't have worked. But because I've now got the measure of what he is likely to deliver, I go, I think we can do that. I think we're going to do that, and that's going to be really effective, rather than it feel like what a waste of a few pages. So yeah, it's a brilliant thing. I just sort of get very excited every time I know there are pages due.
So I do have one more question about the book, but you remind me of another question. We've talked to a lot of writers, like Kieran Gillen was talking to us about how a lot of times he'll write for an artist, or he'll pick an artist, or people will kind of pick an artist. And I've heard this various times, but you're talking about a lot of times writers you don't really have control over that, and they're just kind of assigned to you. What would you say? So clearly you got lucky here. So not in this particular instance, but what would you say you would rather? Would you rather be able to write knowing the artist, or do you just write and hey, if the artist can do it, then they can do it?
To be honest, I think it really depends on what you're working for. I think in the long run, it's great to know who you're writing for when you start off, even if you can't have a conversation with that person, because you can have a look at what they do and kind of tailor your script and the pace of your script and the panel by panel storytelling to suit what they usually do, in the hope that will bring the best out of them. But there's a lot of stuff I do where I have got the luxury of either, as it were, choosing an artist or suggesting an artist, or sometimes having a long ongoing relationship. But a lot of the stuff I do in the UK for 2018, I work with Ian Culbard on Brink, which is a very successful strip. We've done, God knows how many stories about Brink in there. Richard Elson on Kingdom, and Mark Harrison on a strip called The Out, which is literally out in 2018 at the moment and is incredibly popular. And then with Phil Winslade, who has worked in America, we do a Judge Dredd universe strip called Lawless in the Judge Dredd magazine, which is about to reach its 50th episode, which is a fairly big achievement. And that's all intricate. It's a black and white strip, monthly black and white strip with the most intricate sort of line work, and it's amazing. And I've worked with all of them for a long time. We have long conversations on the phone, and those strips are some of the things that I'm most proud of in terms of my output. And the reason I think they're so good is that we are in lockstep each time. So each one is tailored to that artist, and the artist talks to me about their ideas and everything. So there is a kind of simpatico, and so you get something that's really terrific. And that is often the case. So, but when you're working in what might be described as mainstream American comics, my work on Marvel and DC, quite often there's a much more sort of your dad's got a farm, I've got a double bass, let's put the show on here type feel to it. You know, you're assigned a book, and then there you go, who's the artist? And we're thinking of these people, we'll let you know. And so you're already up and running when the artist comes aboard. And more often than not, let's be fair, these are professional artists. It's always great.
That's right.
It's always a lovely, and you build that experience. But even then, as early as possible, I like to talk to the artist or exchange emails and say, what do you like and what do you not like? Is there something you really want to draw? Because I think the other big difference, which is often forgotten, not by artists, let's face it, but one thing that's really forgotten is that as a writer, I can write several things in the course of a month. So I might spend, I don't know, a few days writing an issue of something. It's a commitment of work, but and I can write a page of comics. I could put, every single X-Men who has ever appeared leaps through the teleport door to confront Magneto. That's my work done. But for the artist, that's his whole or her whole month of work.
Right.
That's an enormous amount of commitment. So I think there is a necessity to keep the artist feeling as inspired and essentially as happy as possible, because your whole month hitting a deadline going, why am I drawing this nonsense? I didn't want to do this. These are things I don't like to draw. Why have you given me cars? I hate drawing cars, or whatever it is. It's kind of dumb. So if you can have at least that level of communication with them and say, what do you want to do? Because
you get the best out of them.
You get the best out of them, and they will come back for more, and they will be fired up, and they'll start bringing their creative drive to it, and that's a great way of working. And in fact, it's a really weird thing, but it's you can ask that question, what would you like to draw? And it's almost impossible. I'm sort of setting out a metaphysical challenge now, because it's going to come back and bite me on the arse, I know. But it's almost impossible for them to say something that you then can't do in some way, shape or form. You can find, if you're smart enough, you can find a way of putting in something that is that or like that into whatever story you were doing, so that everybody's happy and you move it forward. So there is this kind of wonderful. Again, we're talking about fashionable things about the way comics are promoted, but back in the day, the glory days of Marvel, for instance, like that, there was this sense of the bullpen. They were writers, they were artists, they were inkers, and it was like, who's free to do this? And they'd go off and do that and that kind of stuff. That's kind of soldier in the trenches. I'll do what I'm writing Man-Thing this month. Okay, fine. You need a Man-Thing, whatever. That to me is exciting. In this day and age, there is a sort of, and I'm not pointing any fingers at anybody at all, but there is a sort of much more kind of curated, almost prima donna-ish attitude to work. So like, I'm only going to write this thing if I'm going to write it from issue 1, and I'm going to be the only writer on it. This is my project. And it's like, well, that's lovely. That's a lovely thing to do because you're promoting on my name. But at the same time, I'm going, now I've got a week spare. Who needs a filler issue? Do you know what I mean? It's like I like that kind of sort of almost improvised. What can we do? How can we do it? Sort of feeling. And sadly, it feels there aren't that many creators in the comics industry around who've got that. They tend to go, no, well, I'll consider my next project when you approach me with the right thing. And I'll go, no, let's get in there. I'll write Hawkman this month. You do whatever. You know what I mean? It's that kind of, what is this? What's going on? What did you do last issue? Oh yeah, I've got an idea. You know, that sort of, because let's face it, some of the greatest comics, certainly some of the greatest Marvel comics, late 60s, early 70s, came out of exactly that kind of slightly not enough time to think work ethic.
Sure.
And if it worked for them, for goodness sake, we should have a bit more of that. Spontaneity, you never know. If you're planning something years in advance, when you finally get there, isn't there a danger it's going to be like, it's a bit stale now, because I've been thinking about it for 8 or 9 months.
That's
but
right.
if it's like, if you get a phone call last week and next week you've got to do something, it's like, oh, wait a minute, this is suddenly all new and fresh, and I'm sort of quite excited by it. That excitement's got to be transmitted, I think. If I don't write for me, excuse me, I don't write to please me, but I figure if what I'm writing is entertaining me whilst I'm doing it, then there is a better than average chance that somebody at the far end is going to go, yeah, it's pretty good. I can see why this is exciting.
Right on.
Appreciate that. Yeah. So last ride question before we move on to Marvel. So just finishing out Rai, it appears that like maybe Dark Tower and Lord of the Rings had a baby, or at the very least they adopted a kid and raised it as their own. Did these books influence you or your work at all?
That's interesting. I can't think of any circumstances whatsoever where the idea of the Dark Tower and the Lord of the Rings having a baby and that not being something I wanted to read being a bad thing. Not consciously, but clearly unconsciously. For goodness sake, I mean, I've been reading since I could read. I read a lot. I read to be inspired. I tend to read less genre these days because it's a kind of slightly busman's holiday and I can see the strings. And I'd rather read non-fiction or something like. But I'll go and read through it. It's just to change pace. But these things creep in all the time. I mean, quite often, we talked about the issue 2 story just now, about the fact that in the back of my head was Ray Bradbury all the way through that. And I'm unashamed to admit that was there deliberately. But I'm sure that sometimes people come to me and say, oh, and I love that kind of, I don't know, Stephen King vibe you put in that issue of Thing. And I go, was there?
Yeah.
God, there really was, isn't there? But it's not consciously channeling.
That makes sense.
So a lot of time it's unconscious. But yes, if the first 5 issues are very much of Rai are very much sort of post-apocalypse, Mad Max, slightly weird, high-tech, low-tech action stuff, I think with issue 6 we've gone into, it's got a bit creepy, it's got a bit supernatural, it's got a bit maybe fantasy within reason. It's it's just going to a different palette. It's going to a different part of the world. We got this quasi-historical setting. Everything's dark and rainy. We've got kind of weird monsters in the woods, and wait for the next couple of issues where we can start seeing really quite weird things happening.
Yes.
And clouds of flies everywhere. It's all Beelzebub, and I think, well, that's a just different vibe. And also, it's a fun vibe to play with. That's my phone. We'll ignore that completely. It's a fun vibe to play with a character who is technological, like Rai. Do you know what I mean? It's he shouldn't be up against magic. He should be up against other technology. So it's that was probably Lisa ringing me to say, stop giving away the secret.
Cool. Well, Buy Rai.
Yes.
We're talking about our family. Buy Rai. It's awesome.
Please buy comics generally because the market is suffering at the moment. But buy Rai and just for those people who are going, wait a minute, it's issue 7. That sounds like a big number. I've missed stuff. There is the trade of the first few issues now out. There is the trade of Fallen World, which comes before it. If you really want to broaden your experience, that exists too. And issue 6, which was only out last month, is a great jumping on point. But I do try to make every issue accessible. So even if you spend the first couple of pages going, who's that? What's going on? You'll get the hang of it. You know what I mean? I think we should have that old school mentality of like, that comic looks interesting. I'm just going to read it. Don't care if it's issue 86.
That's right.
I'm going to start there, and then if I really like it, I will go back and fill in the rest. So yes, please do. Please buy Rai. I'll look forward to seeing you there.
So kind of shifting gears a little bit, a lot of it. So my favorite Dan Abnett work of yours is Annihilation Conquest, with your frequent collaborator and BFF for life, Andy Lanning.
Yes.
As well as the adjacent titles like Guardians of the Galaxy and Nova. And I love your whole cosmic thing. Annihilators, Thanos Imperative, War of the Realms, or Realm of Kings. Sorry.
Yeah, all of those.
Realm of Kings.
Every
War
combination of realm and war that we could possibly get
right. I would have liked to see you write a long Silver Surfer run. That would have been cool. But you had the keys to the kingdom with Marvel Cosmic for such a long time. What was that experience like?
It was brilliant. I love doing it. Primarily because the cosmic heroes are some of my absolute favourite, particularly Marvel Cosmic. I grew up reading a lot of those characters, like I say, Warlock, Captain Marvel, even the early Star-Lords and stuff like that. That was something I had access to as a kid growing up in the UK. Not so much DC. I was a Marvel reader simply because I could get hold of Marvel comics. I enjoyed those things very much. And I love the cosmic aspect. It's something that I've just done a long run on Justice League Odyssey for DC for exactly the same reason. It's superheroes, but it's in space or in a science fiction setting. And I think that sometimes it either brings out a complete difference in the conventional superhero, or you can almost play with it in a way that it's not superheroes. These are just characters in uniforms in a different environment. Anyway, I like it. Science fiction. I like science fiction, obviously, because I write for 2000 AD and everything else that I do. So I loved it. The really weird thing about writing the Marvel Cosmic was that it was considered to be incredibly unfashionable and unsuccessful. So you say I've got the keys to the kingdom. They were rusty keys left under a mat in the back garden. Do you know what I mean? There was nobody. The characters were used occasionally, but certainly not the main ones that I was picking, like Nova and Star-Lord and Groot, and characters that had no particular currency. These were very low tier Marvel characters. They weren't marquee titles at all. And in fact, I tried pitching a Nova series to Marvel earlier, and it hadn't quite got off the ground. And then Andy Schmidt was the editor, and he said, we're going to keep doing this cosmic event, because he liked cosmic too, and I love Keith's work. Doing this cosmic event called Annihilation. Would you like to do the Nova miniseries that fits into that? And it's like, yeah, of course. And from that grew everything else. But there was, and this is going to sound like I'm sort of teasing or bad-mouthing Marvel, and I don't mean it to sound like that, but there was a real case of, oh, do what you like. We don't even care if you break the toys. No one wants those toys. No one gets it.
So much freedom.
Yeah. So it was like, if I'd been writing, I don't know, Thor or Spider-Man or something like that, there would have been a constant like, oh, you must not do drastic things to this character without permission because. But with these things, it was like, these toys haven't been used for a long time, and they can always be reinvented. So just, whatever you like, we're not even going to pay much close attention to it. And in fact, Joe Quesada at the time notoriously and famously said to me several times, I don't get it. I don't get Cosmic. I do not get Cosmic. Which is why the character in the Guardians of the Galaxy ended up saying I don't get Cosmic on a regular basis, because it was a homage to that remark. So we did it. It was surprisingly successful. It was successful enough to Marvel to go, oh, okay, keep doing that. And that gave rise to the Nova series, and it gave rise to Annihilation Conquest, and then Guardians of the Galaxy, etc., etc. And I think there were a lot of interesting things going on there. One is we got to pick a lot of these forgotten characters and who had never been massively successful in their own right, but particularly in terms of Guardians, put them together in interesting mixes. So Rocket had never quite worked. Groot had just been a monster. But you put them in a double act, and suddenly, wow, wait a minute, that's another interesting thing. And we could do stories. I could write stories that were that had genuinely unexpected things happening, in big twists, the drastic, radical, almost anything that happened. And I think readers who wanted Cosmic were responding to that, and readers who liked the fact that they weren't quite sure what was going to happen next were responding to that, and that was great. But we never felt creatively that we were sort of setting the world on fire. It was just like we got a little corner of the Marvel universe that no one had bothered with for a while, a little neglected garden that we were tending back into life, and that was great. And they weren't. I mean, I don't think even at their height they were competing in a full-throated way with Spider-Man or the X-Men. And then, of course, Marvel Studios stepped in, and clearly Marvel Studios, with a desire to do a space adventure film for a change, they confronted us with this very unexpected piece of information that they were going to make a movie out of Guardians of the Galaxy, which is one of the strangest phone calls I've ever had. And there to go from that weird state of there were characters like Star-Lord and Rocket and Groot, etc., that I had loved as a kid, and I thought very, very few other people in the world could even remember. So going to a point where I was writing a comic which was kind of lovingly curating them in their own small enclosed environment, just so that few people like me who remembered them could enjoy them, to going to the point where you walk down the street and the kids are going to school with Rocket Raccoon lunch bags and backpacks and that's all that, and it suddenly goes crazy. And obviously, I'm not taking credit for that because the movie did that. But it was a weird thing. It was almost like sort of exteriorizing my childhood imagination suddenly. That going through that movie, or both movies, and also the way they've turned up in other things, brilliant.
And they also seem to have borrowed your method, right? Because you talked about taking characters and teaming them up based on their chemistry, and that to me is like Infinity War's success right there. Is they've gone, who is the best team up? Like, who do you want to see bounce off each other?
You're being very humble. You're being very humble.
Yeah, you're being very humble.
Yeah.
I am aware of how many people are involved in these sorts of things, these sorts of decisions, and obviously doing that on screen, which I think you're right. I think there are techniques. There are sort of techniques involved in doing things but I think they are techniques that different creators would all seek to use. I mean, I think one of the very entertaining things that came out of the last few Marvel films, for instance, is the sort of strange rivalry buddy of Star-Lord and Thor. Who thought that would work? But it clearly works because those actors bounce off each other incredibly well. So it is that's kind of the casting equivalent of going, are these two comic characters going to work as a double? You know what I mean? I think that's that's kind of an interesting thing to do and an interesting thing to play with. And they do. Marvel does acknowledge it. I mean, they are. It's all work for hire. We work for hire people, but we do. They have been very good enough to give screen credits, acknowledgements, special thanks, and stuff like that. So my name is in, I think, about 4 or 5 of the Marvel movies, which surprised me. Hooray! And with the Guardians films, I got to meet James Gunn and visit the set and see them filming and meet the cast and go to the premiere, which was an amazing experience, and also an amazing experience because they had not told me my name was in the credits, which slightly freaked me out there, which was good.
How cool is that?
They are very good at looking at the vast treasure trove of resources they've got in terms of comics, the stuff that's been created by writers and artists for a long time now, and going, actually, we could. That's a good idea. We could really use it here. We're not going to deliberately cannibalize one story to build up something here, but you can see sort of derivations. So, for instance, I get a special thanks in Thor Ragnarok, which surprised me. And I only later discovered it's because they borrowed the concept of the Revengers from the cosmic stuff I've been writing, and they wanted to use it there, and so they acknowledged it, and I think that's quite nice. That's the idea of getting some credit for these sorts of things. And of course, I enjoy the films like everybody else does. I mean, for goodness sake, probably because I write them because I love these characters, and then go one step beyond that and go, oh my god, there they actually are. Look, they're happening.
It's like seeing your fan fiction come to life.
Yeah.
That's pretty cool.
and every now and then, of course, it is literally, not in a very major way, but sometimes it's literally something I've created. So, Cosmo in Guardians, and the setting of Nowhere, which I literally created myself to sit in the movie house and go, that's okay, wow, look, that's happening. It's actually happening.
So cool.
Speaking of Cosmo, the way you wrote Cosmo the Space Dog was really fun and cute. Do you miss Cosmo?
I do. Yes, I really do. There was a sort of backstory to him that I never got the chance to tell. It wasn't a backstory that was intended to be told, but with a lot of these things, you either throw a crazy idea, like for instance, Nowhere itself, threw that crazy idea in there going, oh, it's a decapitated head of a Celestial. I don't know why. At some point I'll work out why, but for now that's a great location. So there was a kind of backstory ... must work that out because at some point it might become important. But with Cosmo, when I thought of the character, I just went, Yeah, I actually have a little backstory about how he got to be that way, and that's really cool. And that's going to be a story at some point. It's not a story that has to be told, so I didn't feel deprived. I didn't get to tell it on my run of Marvel Cosmic, but it was a story that I go, well, if it ever comes up, I know the answer to these questions. So I'm very, very, very fond of the character.
So is that something in your back pocket that you think you'll publish at some point, or?
Oh, maybe. I don't know if Marvel's going to go in this day and age for a 12-issue Cosmo the Talking Space Dog maxi series, but who knows?
They're sitting on a gold mine.
Hey, so I went back and read this week your 1994 Scarlet Witch mini run. Yeah, it was really fun.
He laughs.
That's it. Well, it made me think about, because obviously in this day and age, there's like college and university classes for RuPaul's Drag Race and like Marvel Comics and all kinds of weird and cool and interesting stuff. If you were to be some sort of college professor teaching a class on Marvel, because you've been there since 1988, is that right?
Yes, pretty much. Yes.
Yeah.
Yeah.
That's amazing.
Yeah.
Like, what do you think you want to? What are the key things about Marvel you want to get across to students? Like, what would you want people to know about?
Goodness me, I think that's a really interesting question. I laughed when you said Scarlet Witch. Scarlet Witch was always one of my favourite characters as a kid, by the way. Mainly because she was one of the comparatively few female characters in the Marvel roster. And I don't necessarily think I did her justice in that story, but it was fun to write her. And sort of the potential I saw for her is sort of impossible to achieve now, because her story's been taken in such a radical, different direction since I did that. But I always thought she was a very cool character. But I think if I had the opportunity, weirdly you say that, I have actually done some classes. I've been even online during lockdown. I've been
Cool.
doing sort of writing classes for universities in the UK and doing sort of doing seminars and stuff like that. So I think I tend to talk more broadly about story and creativity and storytelling techniques specifically in comics, and just the few things that I do know, and not all of them are foolproof, but I use them. But I think in terms of Marvel, and it is true of DC as well, it's probably true in a way of Valiant, but I think in terms of Marvel is the sheer adaptability and range that exists, even though there have been thousands upon thousands of stories told about characters that, there's been so much, you think, is there anything new you can possibly say? And the answer is there's always something new, because these things are flexible and adaptable. There is an ingrained sense of wonder in them that can be exploited in all sorts of different ways. And it might be doing something that is an homage to a earlier story, just having a fun crack at doing a different version of that. It might be putting characters together in an unusual combination. It might be doing something really offbeat with the character, like Tom King did with the Vision or something like that. Handling it in a very different way. Or let's face it, the 12-issue Cosmo the Talking Space Dog maxi series, which obviously is going to be coming soon now. But just those odd things that you can do, and to at the same time respect the heritage of the characters. I said that thing about don't break the toys. It is a truism that no character ever stays dead. But you can sometimes, I think.
Uncle Ben,
and I can attest to this. Captain Marvel, the original male Captain Marvel.
Yep.
Once Jim Starlin done the death of Captain Marvel, it's like we will not bring him back. And even though there was a Cancerverse version of him in my Cosmic books, it was like we're never ever bringing Captain Marvel back to this roster. Besides, we've got the great female Captain Marvel, so we don't need to. But there was nothing can ever get so broken it can't be repaired. So yes, be inventive and exciting with what you do, because someone can always put it right if it's a real terrible mistake. Having said that, I think the respect for that legacy of understanding what those characters are, represent and feel and mean, there is a consistency, not just to the iconic ones like Captain America and Black Panther and stuff like that, but almost all of them, they have a sort of innate vibe that is, if you lose that, it's not that character anymore. And I think that is something that's really important to achieve, and it's something that is much harder to fix. You could kill a character off and they can bring him back for the next issue, but if you break the vibe of that character in whatever way, and I can't really think of an example, but if you do it, it's never quite the same. Do you know what I mean? It's like, it's difficult to recover from that. I mean, I hope, honest to God, I hope that I've never done that with any of these characters. And some of these I've got a reputation for taking sort of minor characters and rebooting them, and I think I've always tried to do that with keeping that kind of essence in mind. But I think it is that. Yeah. You shouldn't be intimidated by the past. and you should gleefully embrace your inner child going, oh, I've always wanted to write this character. But at the same time, you do your due diligence, do your homework, understand why that character is a great character, where it's come from, what the things are, what makes it a great character, and sort of try and do something with that, because I think that applies to any character in anything, but certainly for Marvel's sheer adaptability over the years has been one of its great strengths. But you can handle that adaptability wrong if you're just sort of going in it in a ham-fisted way. So I guess it'd be that. But that's been my TED talk.
You talk about. Thank you for coming to my TED talk. So you talk about do not be intimidated by the past. But do you feel that you were continuing Jim Starlin's Cosmic Marvel legacy? And what was that like? And did you guys ever collab on it as far as that passing of the reins of Cosmic Marvel?
Sadly, we didn't. Jim Starlin is one of the artists, and indeed writers, because he wrote so much he does, who is one of my absolute all-time favourites. Just absolutely is. So, I wish I was following in his footsteps. You know what I mean? It's like I'm not worthy to do that. It was wonderful to be able to write characters, both characters that he created or characters he's written, and also to sort of follow on in the. I wanted to channel. We're talking about vibe again. I wanted to try and get that kind of vibe going as best as I could, and it was lovely. The most direct contact we've had was Marvel asked me to write a Rocket and Groot novel, prose novel, no pictures, which after the film came out, which if you've not read is very, very silly. It's kind of Rocket and Groot, Hitchhiker's Guide to the Galaxy, crazy, full of gags. I enjoyed writing it very much. And they got Jim to blurb it. So on the cover there is a cover for Jim. So, and kind of that impressed me more than anything else in the history of the world. It was like, he's wow, he knows my number. So I think there is that, and over the years I've been lucky enough to meet all sorts of people I have grown up reading, and it's always interesting. It's never a disappointment, and become friends with some people and have long conversations with some people and that kind of stuff. And I think that's part of that sort of carrying that tradition. We all know, all of us, even the people who create characters, know that when you're working for Marvel, you're working for DC, you are just the latest hands on that character. You're the person carrying that character for now, and you've picked it up from somebody else probably, and you're certainly going to hand it on to somebody else, because that's how the longevity of these characters work. And all you've got to do is do your best job whilst you've got that custodianship. And there is a great legacy. I do feel a connection to writers and artists who have worked on the characters that I have written on, even if I've never met them. There is that sort of connection there, and I almost always, in great detail, go and read as much of that work as I possibly can to get not just it's not just a matter of reading you handed a new character, you don't just go and read the Wikipedia entry and go, oh yeah, I've got the hang of that. You go and look at what those stories were actually like and how they were told, either because you want to channel a bit of that and try and allow it to drive what you're doing, or because you creatively want to avoid that, and not because it's bad, but you're going, right, okay, they've done that was great, how can I do something really different to make this a worthwhile contribution to the history of this character? So there's a lot of thinking, and delightfully a lot of comic reading that goes into a day's work.
Oh, that's good. Thankfully that's one of the perks of us doing this stuff. Like, we all have normal jobs on top of doing this. But reading comics is, totally worth it. Annihilation Conquest, I hadn't paid much attention to before we started planning this interview with you. And when we were all starting to figure out what we should read, Judah was like, hey, you guys need to read. It's really good. So it has a pretty cute queer relationship, which surprised me, because I'm imagining that was a big deal in 2007. But was it? What was the feedback like at the time?
Weirdly, I suppose it must have been, except that no one commented on it at all, and that's possibly because I was getting away with writing the stories that I wanted to write, and nobody was, as I said, we're in this kind of like self-policed corner of the Marvel Universe for a brief span, and therefore the sort of things that it's interesting that after my work on the Cosmic finished, I did do a short run, or I pitched to Marvel the idea of revamping Hercules. and it was jumped at, and unfortunately it didn't get a very long run. It got folded into a crossover and disappeared. But I think the first 6 issues, I'm incredibly proud of, because it was a really good new take on Hercules that Marvel editorial really got behind, and I really enjoyed doing it. And then the last few issues, which were finishing up the story, got folded into an event. So the last 4 issues, sort of a crossover in which his story is trying to get through. So it was a shame, but Hercules interested me because, of course, Hercules, like Thor, is a hero who exists outside the Marvel universe. That is to say, he's a historical, legendary hero, but he's always been seen as a complete joker and an oaf, a buffoon in the Marvel universe. Which is the interesting thing, contrasting to Thor, who obviously can be heroic. And my pitch to them is that, well, look, Hercules is not only one of the earliest heroes we've ever heard of, but he's possibly kind of the origin of all heroes. You know, his legend goes back so far we don't know what he's almost the origin of all heroes. He's also immortal. So in Marvel Universe terms, what if the oafish, drunkard, womanizing and otherizing Hercules that we know from since the 1960s, what if he's just had a few decades off because he's had a big adventure, and in his terms that was just like a long weekend. He was out having a good time. And he wakes up one morning and goes, I've really got to get my act together. What happens if he gets his act together and starts doing it seriously again? And they went, what would happen? I go, this is what would happen. And that was the basis of the series. And it was really, really good. Now, obviously, it is established beyond Marvel Comics in terms of public domain Hercules, that Hercules has had relationships with both sexes. And that has been hinted at.
I'm pretty sure.
Absolutely. And that has been hinted at in Marvel continuity. And it, actually, I'm delighted to see recently has now been finally acknowledged. But when the book was announced, when my Hercules book was announced, and it was a shock to me compared to some of the things I've been able to write in Guardians and Annihilation Conquest, is that immediately the press were going, oh, is it going to acknowledge Hercules' bisexuality? And Marvel denied completely that he was, at the time, they denied completely. And it got me in such a because I hadn't even made that decision. I hadn't said whether it was or not. So it was quite problematic.
Dan, you and Andy also worked on New Mutants together. Kind of the big link between the cosmic stuff and the New Mutants is Warlock.
Yeah.
Yes.
Different Warlocks, but yes.
Right.
It's fun when a comic company has 2 characters called the same thing. It's quite interesting that you end up writing both. So.
But no, that Warlock showed up in.
Oh yes, no, absolutely.
Yeah.
No, New Mutants was a book that I obviously adored since the Sienkiewicz classic stories, and it was fun to write. It was fun to be invited to write an X book, and it was weird. There are certain issues of New Mutants that I think we did really well. There are certain standout issues which I would go, that's great. And then we got sort of drawn into event stories and stuff like that, where it kind of meandered a bit. But it was a great fun book to work on. And there are, like I said, those key issues, usually drawn by Dave LaFuentes. They're just really lovely stuff with great character stuff going on in them.
Cool. Yeah. What was working on that series like?
It was interesting. It was again that comparison with things like Guardians of the Galaxy, where we kind of could make our own rules to working on an X book, and this is obviously true. And there's nothing wrong with this, but you start working on an X book, you've got to coordinate with the other X books. There's an awful lot of ongoing material to make sure that you're not doing something that's going to contradict something, and that's been the case. And certainly over the last 6 or 7 years working at DC, it's been exactly the same thing, because I've been working on characters or books that are connected to are literally appearing the same month in other books, and there's got to be coordination. Otherwise, you could end up with sort of weird duplications or strangenesses happening. And that's all just part of working in a shared universe, which is a great fun thing to do.
Cool, awesome.
All right, so now it's time for DC.